Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the changes that are going to go on with the CFP here pretty soon, and a lot of those are going to have to do with what the SEC and the Big Ten want the CFP to be in a couple of years, and it's probably not going to be something that a lot of Big 12 and ACC fans love, but we'll see how it goes. We'll definitely keep our pulse on that, and we'll keep you guys updated as it unfolds. But another thing that's been happening around the college football world is spring game cancellations. A lot of teams are opting for kind of a different way to go about spring going forward, with this sport kind of mirroring the NFL more and more as we get down the road. Some teams are mirroring the NFL a little bit more and more as we get down. So it's going to be really interesting to watch all of this unfold, and I think there's a couple of different reasons that this is happening. There's a couple of different reasons that people have given, some that I don't fully buy, some that I totally buy, and I think some that they haven't said but are definitely a good reason for this thing to be canceled. So let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll start with the teams that have canceled their events this far. Texas, Nebraska, USC, Missouri, and Florida State. None of those teams will have the spring game. None of those teams, as of right now, will have kind of a pseudo spring game like Ole Miss had last year, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But these teams will not have a spring game, and it'll be kind of an interesting thing. It's definitely something where Texas, they cited kind of wear and tear after playing 16 games this year, 14 games the year before. I'm not fully buying that. I'll be totally honest with you. If you remember anything about this past Texas offseason, the two people that got injured, CJ Baxter and Christian Clark, both got injured in fall camp. So practices are a little bit more aggressive than those spring games are. Even Kirby Smart, I saw Graham Coffey on Twitter, who covers UGA football. He was talking about Kirby Smart saying every time after that spring game, he just said, that was the easiest practice we've had all spring. So it's not that these spring games are more intense. It's not that the guys get injured at a higher rate than they do in practice. That one's not really the reason. Let's just be totally honest. Now, there are good reasons to do this, but I don't necessarily think wear and tear is a great reason to get rid of your spring game. But that was the one that Steve Sarkisian gave, at least for the time being. I think there's a couple other reasons that they would do that, and we'll get to that here in a second. For Nebraska, it was a little bit more of the tampering side of things. I know that's a big-time worry around the sport right about now, and I do agree that that is definitely something that you have to think about. When you go out on a spring game, you're essentially giving all your guys an audition for other teams, and that is a question that you're going to have to answer, and that's something that not everyone loves by any means. So it's going to be an interesting thing. I don't necessarily think if a team wanted your guy, I don't think a spring game is going to change it one way or the other. I think they're going to come get your guy or they're not, one way or the other, before or after the spring game. So I don't think that necessarily changes too much in the tampering world, but that is a very real worry. You know, you give your guys one last chance to audition for every other team in the country, and then they get calls very shortly after. I can promise you that. And then you got USC, Missouri, Florida State, all have kind of given different options. USC was a little bit of both between the wear and tear and tampering. Missouri and Florida State kind of the same thing, and all of those reasons, I understand where they're coming from. I do think there is some validity to some of those worries, but at the end of the day, I think there's better reasons why they're not doing it, and we'll talk about those in a second. But a couple of teams that are doing what they call untraditional spring games. Ole Miss did this last year with the Grove Bowl games, and this was kind of a divisive topic, weirdly enough, on X and on Twitter and on all those different social apps. People loved it or they hated it. I frankly loved it. I thought the biggest thing about spring, the biggest thing about spring games in general, is getting the fans involved, is allowing the fans to come see your team for free, get a chance to go see your players and get some autographs, see them have some fun, and that's exactly what happened down in Oxford this last year. Now, it's not necessarily football, and if you came to see football, you didn't necessarily get what you wanted, but you got a dunk contest, which was pretty cool. But at the end of the day, I do think that's a fun way to engage fans, at the very least. That's a fun way to get the fans involved, get them in the building, have a good day for the fans, and then continue moving on about your business. Because at the end of the day, spring games are way more for the fans than they are for the teams, because, as I said earlier, they're relatively easy practices in the grand scheme of things. Also, Ohio State, Iowa, Arizona, those will all do kind of untraditional. Not really sure what form those will take. I don't think they'll be kind of a Grove Bowl games type thing, but I do think they'll be probably just a little bit more pseudo scrimmages, just a little bit different, a little bit more safe, a little bit more just keeping your foot off the gas pedal that little bit more than you need to during this time. So it's all kind of up in the air. I think there's a lot of people that will not love these untraditional spring games. But the reality is, I think a lot more of them are coming down the pipe. I think the teams that we just talked about could very well join this list. A Texas team that definitely has the ability to have something like this. They very well could have an untraditional spring game in a couple of weeks and just not call it a spring game, but call it a day at DKR, whatever it's called. At the end of the day, I do think a lot of the teams that we talked about not having games will probably join this list, at least in some capacity, and that's kind of the biggest thing for me. You want to make sure that the fans are involved. You want to make sure the fans that have that day during the spring where they get to go out and support their team, you don't want to take that away entirely, and these 4 teams at the very least are trying something a little bit different. And then there are a ton of teams that are still having games. There are a ton of teams that are still going to suit up and have a relatively normal spring game. Alabama, Notre Dame, Florida, LSU, Michigan, Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, all those teams will play, and all of them will play on April 12th. So it'll be a really fun time. We will still be able to see those incredible games. We'll still be able to see a guy like Ty Simpson. Is he going to be the starter for Alabama? For Notre Dame, will C.J. Carr step up into the mix? For Michigan, watching Bryce Underwood get to work is going to be an incredible thing to watch and might be one of the biggest names to watch as we get into spring. So there will be plenty of fun during spring. There will be plenty of spring games to watch during this time. Some teams are opting away from that, and there's a number of different reasons for that. I think one of the bigger reasons, and one that not everyone's saying, but one of my favorite college football guys in the business right now is saying, money saving is a big part of this. Let's just be totally honest. And this is something that Brooks Austin came up with, and over at the Film Guy Network does an incredible job covering mainly Georgia football, but does a number of different teams, a number of different film studies, does a great job. But he was talking about this. A lot of bills are coming up for a lot of these teams. You know, they have the $20 million that's going to revenue sharing this upcoming year and going forward. They have a number of different things in NIL. A couple of these teams are updating facilities. Every single team, every single athletic department in the country is trying to save money. They're trying to find a way to make sure that all the ends meet, make sure that they have all of the money they could possibly need going into this new era, because you don't want to get caught without the money that you owe a player, that you promised a player, because as we've seen in the past, that leads to some lawsuits, and you don't need that on your table by any means. So money saving is a big time part of this. It costs money to put these things on. You are doing a full day of game operations for essentially no money, because you're not going to charge your fans to come into that thing. Now, some teams do, or some teams did, and kind of went away from that in the past couple of years, but you still got to put on concessions. You still got to put on all these different things that do cost quite a bit of money. So it is a money-saving tactic, and it's one of those things that I'd still love them to have something, but maybe they can save a little bit of money in that process and just make sure that they have that $20 million, that they have all the NIL money, that they have everything that they possibly could need going into 2025, 26, and going forward. So I do think money saving is a part of this. I do think it's just a day where they say, maybe that's one that we can knock off the checkbooks and say that's going to go towards NIL, and I don't think many fans would be too opposed to that. I think a lot of fans understand that if you're going to win this game at the end of the day, if you're going to win a national title, you got to have NIL involved. So saving a little bit of money on a spring game, if it means that you win 1 or 2 more games in the fall, I think fans will be more than fine with that. The other part of this is it's an NFL approach. You know, you're getting a little bit closer to what the NFL is in payment, in structure, and maybe even player values, maybe even a player union coming up here pretty soon, which I think is absolutely necessary. And another thing that we can get into a little bit later, but it's an NFL approach. You know, you're playing a 16-game schedule. You want to make sure that you have your eyes fully ready to go into the next season, and the NFL seems to have that down pretty good. So OTAs, different things like that are absolutely something that could happen in the next couple of years for college football, and I don't think it's a really terrible thing. Now, I don't necessarily love it, but as long as you have those open practices where people can come in and get to view like NFL teams have, I don't see the real harm in this. I don't think it really hurts you to not have a spring game, but have an OTA day where everyone can come out and kind of enjoy it and do some autographs and do some different things. So overall, I think it's just some teams looking around saying, if this thing is going to be like the NFL, I might as well mirror the guys in the NFL. I might as well mirror the teams that have been doing it this way for a very long time and have done a really good job doing it this way. So I do think that's part of it. They're just looking at the next level and saying, we're becoming more like that. We might as well lean into it. And then finally, poaching is a real part of this. There's no doubt about that. There are a number of different teams that are watching spring games all around the country. There are a number of coaches that will be watching spring games. There are some coaches that job it is to watch spring games to see if there are guys that they want. That's just the reality of the sport right now. something we absolutely have to get under control. There's no doubt about that. And definitely something that will be kind of litigated over the next little bit, but it is a reality. It is an audition for another team in some ways. It is an audition to go to another team to get a little bit more money, or maybe to, get your brand out there just a little bit more. It's all business. I fully understand that, and this is a part of spring games. It's a part that I don't think any coach likes. So Matt Rule said as much. He does not want his guys getting poached by other teams because they put on a 4-touchdown performance in their spring game, and I understand that. Now, I don't necessarily think it's a huge worry. I do think some teams are, if they want your guy, they're going to come get your guy regardless of the spring game performance. But at the end of the day, I do think it is something to think about and is a deterrent to having that spring game coming up in a couple of weeks. But overall, I think my take is, it's not the ideal way I want things to go by any means. I very much want spring games to be a thing. Frankly, I would love for Texas to play UTSA in the spring. I'd love for Nebraska to play a small team in Nebraska. I'd love it to be kind of a really fun way to get some FCS team involved, maybe give that little payment when you don't have to play them in the regular season. You get to play them during the spring and give them that $2 million that helps out that athletic department. But again, money saving is a huge part of the sport right now, especially right now. Now, a couple years down the road, maybe Texas, Nebraska, USC, they have everything fully under control, and they can say, let's bring back the spring game. Let's get back to this kind of the roots that we have. They could also say, let's just do a great fan event this upcoming year. Maybe we do everyone comes out and gets autographs for a day. Maybe kids come out and do drills with the players, whatever it looks like. The biggest thing here is the spring is a very long time for college football fans to not have college football. Spring games are really fun, and a lot of them, don't mean all that much. Obviously, you don't necessarily get a good idea of how great the team is because it's a zero-sum game, and that's something we'll talk about a lot throughout this spring process. But overall, it's an unfortunate casualty of the new age of college football. It's something that I'd very much like to continue on, and it will continue on for a couple of years at a number of different places. Will it continue in 10 years? I'd be a little bit surprised, if I'm being totally honest. And I almost hate to say that, but I do think there's a reality where the schedule for college football, even in the offseason, mirrors a lot of the schedule of the NFL, and I think there's pros and cons to that. I think there's still ways to get the fans involved, and as long as that's happening, as long as we have the fans involved on a consistent basis throughout the offseason and giving them that chance to go in for free and get a couple autographs, enjoy that, go to see Arch Manning play during a practice, go see, Jaden Mayava, go see Dylan Raiola throw at a practice. I think as long as you have that, you're more than fine. It's far down on my worry list for college football is spring games getting canceled, but it is kind of a new wrinkle to this sport, a new wrinkle to the offseason, and we'll see how it unfolds over the next little bit. Maybe some teams will go back to it in 2025 and going forward. Maybe some teams will continue to kind of lean away from it over the next couple of years. But will be a really interesting thing to watch. We'll see how it unfolds for Texas, for Nebraska, for USC. We'll see if they add anything to the schedule. A lot of different things that we'll be watching over the next little bit, but plenty of spring games to talk about, and we will have plenty of time to get into that. But let's take our other break here, and when we come back, let's talk about the Combine. It is starting today up there in Indianapolis. Measurements, on-field workouts are getting going, and let's go through the schedule. Let's get into some teams, some players to watch, a lot of different things. As we get into the Combine, we'll talk about it right after this.